Welcome, everyone, to the Center for Threat-Informed Defense's four-part series on threat modeling, where we're talking about the threat modeling process by answering four key questions. I'm Tiffany Bergeron with the Center for Threat-Informed Defense, and joining us on this series is Adam Shostak, a leading expert on threat modeling who has written most popular books on this subject and has developed a variety of training in this area. Adam is also one of the creators of the four questions we've been discussing. Adam, welcome.
Great to be here.
Thank you for joining me. So, in our previous discussions, we have covered the previous three questions, the first three questions of the threat modeling process. What are we working on? What could go wrong? And what are we going to do about it? This is the final of these questions. This is the last of our series on threat modeling. And that question is, did we do a good job? And this question is really an assessment of the actions that we took in our threat modeling process, looking back and lesson learned. So do you like to go ahead and get us started in this area?
Sure. I think there are two parts to this. One is what I think of as the mechanical things, right? Do we have a system model of some form? Do we have a list of threats? Have we gone through that list of threats and assigned some action to that, even if the action is to treat it as an accepted risk? Somebody should make a decision. Yep, that's an acceptable risk to me.
Mm-hmm.
As a vice president here, I'm going to say that that's okay. The second piece is, do people feel like they've done a good job? And this goes to organizational change, right? We both work with a lot of customers for whom structured threat modeling is a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to decide, do we do it again? And for all of the complexity in that question, I have found that there is actually a single predictive factor that defines whether or not they're going to do it again. And that is the question, would you recommend threat modeling to a colleague?
Mm-hmm.
If the people who were involved say, that was a good use of my time, I'm glad I did it, everything else flows nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And if they say, no, I felt my time was wasted, then you're in trouble. And you can manage the second one a little bit. You can say, hey, the first time you go to the gym, you are not going to walk out of the gym with a six-pack and looking buff. You're going to walk out of the gym feeling sore.
Mm-hmm.
So let's please not judge whether or not we go back to the gym on that first session. But at some point, if you're not producing value for someone, people are going to stop.
Um, to sort of build on that, have you found that there are any of the items or pieces or processes um, under this threat modeling, under the threat modeling approach, that people take more value in, or is there a way that you can ensure that value is being provided through the threat modeling process?
That's a hell of a question. I love that question. Thank you. Um, so when I joined Microsoft and was told to go fix this threat modeling thing, the process that we had 17 steps in it.
Mm.
Um, it included steps like make a list of all of your assumptions. And it turns out that making a list of all of your assumptions is really hard.
Yeah.
And what I now teach people to do is track it when someone says I assume or I think. Has almost the same effect, but it's a way more satisfying thing because you're not sitting there in this endless, do I have enough assumptions on my piece of paper?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a conversation I had with Window Snyder, and she had been doing threat modeling at Microsoft before me, and she said, Adam, people really want to know when they're done.
Interesting.
Um, and a lot of what I have done very implicitly is answer that question. So thanks, Window, if you're watching. I get a lot of mileage out of that conversation. um, and so if I knew, actually, I'll give you another one. When I first drew the thing that became the 4-question framework, it also had a thing, I think it was either vision or requirements that fed into the process. And it turns out that that also was hard for people to do, right? Defining good security requirements is tough. I have I have a chapter in my threat modeling book, which is a requirements cookbook. My idea was I would give people some stock answers to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I occasionally ask people, have you ever used that section? Here, I'll do it right now. Be honest. Have you ever used that chapter?
I actually,
No is a fine answer.
no, I have not for many years. Um, but there is one sponsor environment in particular that I'm thinking of, which was a government sponsor where
Okay.
that did come in handy.
Oh, well, you may be the first person in a long time who has said that they actually found it useful. So thank
Well,
you.
well, you're welcome. Thank you for writing the book.
But also, I no longer talk about requirements because they're hard and because I don't get a yes to that. I don't even ask that question very much because that's how little I believe I'm going to get a yes answer.
Okay, that's interesting to me, because I would think that um, there are lots of environments where system requirements are required. And if you're helping people with a starting point, a foundation for that, that would be useful.
Well, I don't I don't work with a lot of organizations. And now that you mention it, I've been reading Axel Worth's book. It's got 3 authors, but on medical device security. And they talk more about requirements. And so I'm a little surprised that I don't get more of that feedback from my medical device
Mm-hmm.
customers. But so the other piece to this is when I think about the question of did we do a good job, I encourage people to do retrospectives. And part of the point of doing a threat modeling specific retro is to give them a chance to hone and develop the process that works for them in their environment with their needs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm actually curious what you find because a lot of what you're doing is in partnership with commercial
Mm-hmm.
organizations. And do you find there are factors that lead people to either come back and say, let's do that again, or not, frankly?
Um, so frankly, I would say it's about 50-50. I think some environments are more open to understanding the threat modeling process, bringing all of the right people together to follow through on the different concepts of threat modeling, to really going through, I mean, you're saying you've seen a 17 question approach. This 4 question approach has been around for some time. It's streamlined, but I think it's still thorough enough where it gives um, everyone that ability to really apply what this means to them for a given system that we're working on. And I think in those environments that sort of foster that type of collaboration and information sharing, they do want to not only understand question 4, did we do a good job, but to understand how threat modeling benefited the system design or the system development, um, and understand the level of mitigations that that not only are available to them, but the decision processes made to employ those, um, and then understanding that it's a living process, right? You don't just do it once and
Mm-hmm.
then put the system into production and then you're done. But in those situations where, and perhaps it's more resource driven, but where they have that ability to keep reevaluating the system, reevaluating the threats, and improving defenses. I have seen in those environments that they are more receptive to threat modeling.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the 50-50 thing. I've absolutely had customers who show up, get training, and will tell me, yeah, it's going fine. We got this now. And who don't seem to need a lot more support. And as a security person who is somewhat skeptical and cynical on occasion, um, I thought they were blowing smoke. And then I ran into one of them at a conference, and he was with some of their people. And he introduced me to them, and he's like, yeah, this is the guy who designed our program.
Mm-hmm.
And they started asking me questions, which made it very clear that they were threat modeling. It had just clicked for them, and they were doing it, and they didn't need me. And that's wonderful.
That's
I
really cool.
just wish they had told me earlier because I was like, oh, I wish it had worked better for those folks. We spent time and energy helping them,
Mm.
and then they disappeared.
And it turns out that you had trained them so well that they were able to take it and make it their own and uh, implement the process themselves. So that's excellent testimony to your work.
Well, that wasn't really the goal. I was
I
more,
know,
but
I
thank
know,
you.
but it is. Um, and and I think that's great that you were able to get that feedback because we don't always, right, have those chance meetings or those follow-ups. So I think that's really wonderful to hear that um, the outcome there was that they learned from the approach, they embraced the approach, and they've continued to tailor it and improve it over time in their environment. So that's excellent.
And I think that's really sort of where I want to leave people is we came into this with you and I having different approaches to how do we use attack.
Mm-hmm.
And each of them is responsive to the environment in which we're brought in, the goals that those folks have, the type of development work that they're doing. And all of that is enabled by being thoughtful about the question, did we do a good job?
Mm-hmm.
And saying, okay, we've done this. And, you and MITRE are really good at doing this, of saying, okay, we did that project. What lessons are we going to take away? How are we going to change this before we do it again? And that's leading you to success, and it's leading your customers to success, which is really nice to see. And everyone can spend the time to say, okay, we just spent an hour a day, a week, depending on the size of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, before I go on with this, sometimes people really think threat modeling has to be this big, complex thing. And I said, as we were talking about what are we working on at the beginning of this series, I said 5 minutes with a cocktail napkin, and I mean it. Right? You can do useful threat modeling work in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, and I say this with appreciation for the folks who are running the Threat Mod Con hackathon or Threat Model Connect hackathon, the winning entries in that contest were overwhelmingly large.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've brought this up with the judges and in the community forum. I said I think we need to make sure we don't reward quantity of work and give people the impression that that's the only thing a great threat model can be. Right? Those teams worked hard. They did nice work.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
impressed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doubly impressed since it was a hackathon, not even a real system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you can threat model usefully in an hour or a couple of hours. And doing that and saying makes it easier to say, yep, it was worth the couple hours of work that we did. Let's try it again. And if you insist that it's got to be a week and you need a spreadsheet with 20 columns and 50 lines, and that's your definition of success is we find 50 threats,
Mm-hmm.
you might never get to do it again because people will say that was too much work for the value we got out of it. So I really want to encourage people to do an amount of work that they think is going to be worthwhile as they're doing their first experiments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point. Threat modeling doesn't have to take a long time. It really doesn't have to, and it's not a one and done. So repeating the process is important, but starting the process is possibly even more important.
You can't repeat it until you've done it once.
Yeah. Yep. So whatever that means, like you're saying, if it's a napkin, take these 4 questions as a guide. What are we working on? What could go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? Those 4 things, start by answering those. And if you find you need to expand upon that, by all means, but start there. And then, hopefully that can build in the value. So when you get to question 4, do we do a good job? Um, and you're evaluating your existing threat model, you're evaluating the mitigations you've applied to the system, and you're evaluating the value that different groups got out of this process, that it is a positive answer and a positive result. Okay, so I think that does it for question 4, the last question in our 4-part threat modeling process. That being, did we do a good job? Please do remember that you can go back and see the first 3 installments in this 4-part series. I would also like to remind you that additional resources are available for you to take and implement threat modeling for your own systems and environments. MITRE's Center for Threat Informed Defense, of course, has the threat modeling with attack process that we've been talking about throughout this series. You can find that at ctid.mitre.org. That's ctid.mitre.org. And Adam, could you please share with us the resources that you offer as well?
Absolutely. Beyond the books, we work with Showstack and Associates works with lots of organizations to help with these processes. We've got all sorts of free resources at showstack.org, and you are invited to come check them out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation about threat modeling. And yeah, I look forward to working with you more in the future.
Sounds lovely. I've had a great time doing this. Thank you so much for organizing it.